All right, we're going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to take an email from a listener. I've said many times in videos and on my podcast, If These Hills Could Talk, that if anyone out there had any questions or comments, things they would like to talk about, to reach out to me, and I'd be glad to talk to them about it. Before I do that, though, I do want to say that when I'm making videos on social media, I'm coming at what I consider hypocritical people, and I'm coming at what I consider to be bullies. So I'm not always the most respectful person towards them because they show none toward no one else. I don't believe in this. I believe in giving people what they give me. And if someone leaves some disrespectful comment on my stuff, if I feel the urge to reply, I'm not going to say anything respectful back. But if someone comes at me with respect, then I can give that back. And so this is what I'm doing today. I've got this email here from Robert, who sent me a respectful email, just wanted to talk about things, and I'm going to be respectful back to Robert and tell him what I think of this email he sent. He starts off here, he says, consider this. Number one, religion is man-made. That we agree on. Number two, religion is designed to control the masses. I agree on that. Number three, religion is all about what you do for or to please God. I can see that. Number four, religion tries to sanctify the flesh, causing people to strive to be better than other people and holier than thou. I can see that. And number five, religion introduces the doctrine that you have to look or act a certain way in order for God to accept you. Okay, we're together so far. But right here you say, salvation, on the other hand, requires nothing of you. You do not have to get rid of the tattoos or get a haircut or buy new clothes. Salvation is all about what God has done for you. Abraham trusted God, and it was imputed for righteousness. Jesus did not come to save the sanctified, nor the holier than thou. He came to save the lost, that whosoever will trust God and not trust themselves. So thanks, Robert, for your email. And I'm just going to kind of break it down and give you my thoughts on it. First of all, the first half of it, when you're talking about religion being man-made, used to control the masses, we're in agreement on that part. When you get to the part here about salvation, on the other hand, requires nothing of you. I understand the sentiment and I understand the direction you're trying to take this. I do believe that a person can come to their own personal brand of salvation, and they can do so, after studying a whole lot of things. Like me personally, I was raised in church. I was taught that the Bible was the Word of God. As I got older, I went through a phase where I was pretty agnostic. Then I just for a long time would tell everyone I was an atheist. Then I kind of circled back to agnostic because atheist just seems too sure of itself. And, I study a whole lot of Buddhism these days, and I listen to a lot of secular Buddhist style podcasts. And I believe that someone can come to their own conclusions and that they can find peace within themselves, after, studying a whole lot of different things and going through a whole lot of suffering in their life. I do believe that a person, after so much suffering and living a hard life and going through a lot of things, I believe they can reach inner peace, and I believe they can become at peace with things that used to torment them. Absolutely believe that. Where you kind of lose me here, though, is where you say salvation is all about what God has done for you. That's always something I've had a hard time with personally. I've had a hard times with words like blessed, because to me, when I say I've been blessed, that implies that a higher power looked down on me and found favor upon me. And, I went through a phase where not too long ago, about a year ago, where I went through a really hard time, and I lost a job that I really liked. And, I was struggling to get back on my feet. And one day I just lucked up and found a good paying job with some good benefits. And, I could say, well, I was blessed. But I would have a hard time using that word because that would mean that a being looked down on the world and he saw some kid with brain cancer, and yet he chose to give me a new job. I've never been able to say those things. I'll say, like, man, I sure was, right place, right time. I was lucky. I got that. But I don't necessarily believe that God did it for me. I believe that the world just happens. I don't necessarily think that God is doing anything for any of us, really. I believe that, I don't mean to sound like Forrest Gump here, but it's just like shit happens and we assign whatever we want to it. I could have immediately took to Facebook and said, God has blessed me with a new job. God helped me find a new car to get back to that job. I could say that, but I would feel a little bit guilty saying that, considering there's famine, considering there's wars, considering there's all these diseases and all these things that people go through. And there's people fighting a whole lot bigger battle than I've ever fought, and they're not getting help. To me, that's almost like Santa Claus when Santa Claus brought the rich kids the really good toys, and the poor kids sometimes they got something from the dollar store, or didn't get anything at all that year. I remember used to think, well, wait, if there's a Santa Claus, that kid that lives at the end of the holler that ain't got no running water, he should have got the same stuff the rest of us got, but he didn't get jack shit. So that's where I kind of lose it on the salvation about is what God has done for you. And then when you turn to the story of Abraham trusted God and it was imputed for righteousness. That story you're referring to comes from Genesis chapter 22, and I pulled it up here. I don't have to read the whole thing necessarily, but I want to, for the people that doesn't know what Robert's referring to, this is Genesis chapter 2, where Abraham is asked by God to sacrifice up his son Isaac to him. So it says, and it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son Isaac, whom thou loves, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. So Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave for the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went into the place that God told him to. Now, I've read somewhere before, don't quote me on this 100%, but I have read somewhere before that Isaac, I always pictured Isaac as like a little boy here, like, maybe less than 10-year-old. But Isaac, from my understanding, what I've read, was in his 20s when this happens. And it says, Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come to you again. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and the knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, son. And he said, Behold, the fire and wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide a lamb for a burnt offering. So both of them went together. And they came to the place which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar thereof, laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called out unto the heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And they said, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast withheld thine only son from me. Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram was caught in a thicket by his thorns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up as a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, as it is said to this day, the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. So that's the story. God wanted to know if this man feared him, so he instructed him to murder his own child. Some people find peace and comfort in that story. I find it to be very disturbing, to be dead honest with you. That God, who knew Abraham's heart, God knew the kind of man that Abraham was. So why did he have to instruct him to sacrifice his own son just to prove that he fears him? When the angel says, now we know that you fear him. It's like, really? Like, this being would test a man in that way. Do you realize the torment that Abraham probably went through thinking about this? And then, can you realize, I always thought about it too from Isaac's point of view, like, wow, Dad, you was listening to this being who, wanted to take me out. But then it goes on to talk about how that the angel of the Lord called up to Abraham out of heaven the second time and said, by myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing and hast not withheld thy son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying, and I will multiply thy seed. So in order for Abraham to be blessed, he had to show his fear of God by attempting to slay his own child. And I've just always found that story disturbing. It doesn't come off to me the way it does a lot of people. I'm a person who, when I read the Bible, I read it to be literal. And I know a lot of people says you can't do that. You got to get into a godly mind in order to read it. You've got to get into a spiritual mind in order to read it. But I just find whenever someone gets into a spiritual mind, that's where they end up getting controlled. And that's where religion can end up, catching them in a snare. There's a whole lot of people out there. The funny part is, Andrea Yates drowned her children in a bathtub because she said God told her to do it. Everybody calls her a nut job, but they read this story and they think Abraham was a good man for doing this, and that God was just simply trying to put him to test. So, going back to what you said about salvation, I can understand where you're going with it, and I can understand that someone can find the inner peace that they need. And over time they can find ways to get past things and to find peace within things. But I don't really personally believe that God does it for you. I believe we figure it out for ourselves. I believe that we all have a mind of our own, and we can figure out which way we want to go with it. We assign things. And here's the thing. I don't know. A lot of these stories of the Bible, we don't know for sure if they were even true or ever really happened, or if they were made up or whatever the case. But just getting inside the Bible with you for a minute here. Abraham, in order, it makes me wonder if Abraham was even right with his thinking. Did God really, if there is a God on the throne, did God really instruct him to do this, or was he just, trying to go overboard to show his love for God? So, there's where you kind of lose me. And again, I'm just having a conversation with you. And again, if you left a nasty ass comment on one of my videos, I'd probably fire back or share a funny GIF at you or something. But you said this in a respectful way, and I hope you appreciate what I've said. I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but that's no problem there. We don't have to agree on this at all. And then you say, Jesus did not come to save the sanctified, nor the holier than thou. He came to save the lost, that whosoever will trust God, not trust themselves. I definitely believe that Jesus was a voice that was totally against the holier than thou. I can agree with that part. He did say that he didn't come to save the righteous. He said those that are not sick doesn't need a physician. It's the ones that are sick needs the help. So yeah, I could see that. But then I could go into, we could get lost for hours here on how I view that whole story, that God, in order to save me, would have to send his own son to be murdered just to protect me in the end from his wrath. I have a lot of mixed emotions about that story, a lot of mixed feelings about it. I've said a lot of things that hits people the wrong way when it comes to that, but it's like, if Jesus was a real man that really did exist in this world, I sometimes wonder if he got caught up trying to be the Messiah himself. I sometimes wonder if he got caught up trying to make it fit. And this always hits people wrong. It just hits them right in the feels when I say it. But sometimes I wonder if he was the David Koresh of his time. David Koresh was down in Waco trying to figure out the 7 seals and thought that God was speaking to him. And we all thought he was crazy. Well, back in those days, Jesus was going around town preaching his message. Everybody thought he was crazy too. And people was out to get his followers, just like they were, Koresh and his. I know that always seems to strike a chord with people, but I'm just saying, how much of that, again, going back to Abraham, where, I say to myself, did Abraham just get inside of his own head and get it twisted? Sometimes I say that about Jesus too. Did he get this in his head that he thinks that, that he had to die this way, that's the only way we could be saved? I just have a feeling that if there was any sort of all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving being that was watching over the whole thing, I just feel like that it could come to the conclusion of forgiveness, or it could come with giving us peace or salvation or understanding or whatever without people having to murder their children. That's just my take on it. But again, Robert, thank you for your comments. And anybody out there, if you want to email me, you can do so at tnbrando423 at gmail.com. That's tnbrando423 at gmail.com. Send me your questions, your comments, your thoughts, and I'll come back and tell you what I think about it. If you just send me a bunch of bullshit and call me a commie and a pedophile and a Satanist and all this stuff, I'll probably just either A, ignore it, or B, just roast your ass, because that's just how I work. But anyway, again, I enjoyed making this one. And Robert, if you want to follow up on it, you know how to reach me. So you can follow up and tell me what you thought about it. And it was good talking with you. But anyway, until next time, I'm Tennessee Brando. Thank you, guys.